With BalanceWise IQ, your management team is empowered to identify and address potential attrition risks before they escalate. This proactive approach ensures that you're always in step with your team's needs and feelings, allowing for quick adjustments as situations change. By managing in the moment, your employees are better supported, more engaged, and therefore able to deliver a superior customer experience. This seamless integration of internal awareness and responsiveness cultivates an environment where excellence in customer service is not just an objective, but a natural outcome of your team's well-being and satisfaction. Visit our website, www.balancewiseiq.online, to find out more.
Everybody, a few minutes after, and so I would like to get started here. My name is Tim Keefe. I'm the CEO of Transform CX, and it's my great privilege today to be moderator for this exciting panel on employee experience 2025 and beyond. We think, and we've been doing work in the customer experience and employee experience now for several decades, that we are entering the age of the employee. And I know there would be people arguing that AI is going to replace all the employees, so there won't be any employees, in which case I'm not sure who's going to actually spend the money to buy the goods to pay for the AI, but that's a different conversation. So I think, again, what we're here today to talk about is what we think is this burgeoning recognition of the importance of the individual employee and their ability to be engaged in the work they're doing and to engage with the company that they're working for. We'll talk a lot about some of the data that's out there, but one of the things that came out early in the year that really triggered the need for this conversation was a Gallup report that talked about employee engagement. And if you haven't read it, it's well worth looking up. We'll reference it later and make it available to everybody who joins the call. But the global average for employees that are engaged in the work that they do, in other words, really doing it, not just phoning it in or being quiet quitting or coffee badging, the people that are actually engaged is 30%. That means 30% of your workforce is, on average, is doing what you're paying them to do and engaged in doing the work, and 70% is not. I think it's a massive problem, and it's been called out as a multi-trillion-dollar business problem, but it affects all of us because it's not just about work, it's also about how we interact with the society around us and how the companies interact with those employees. Anyway, again, my name is Tim Keefe. I'm the CEO at Transform CX, and I'd really like to introduce my panel guests today. We have 4 panel members, and maybe I'll start with Mr. Kevin Shields from Johns Hopkins.
Thanks, Tim. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the seminar. It's great to be here today. I'm Kevin Shields, the Director of Medical Services for the Johns Hopkins Health System, and I'm delighted to be here today, and I look forward to a great conversation.
All right. Thanks, Kev. And then secondly, I'd like to bring on Diana Chu. Diana is an executive coach and works with all the calm, cool, collected people of Silicon Valley. So I'm sure, it's very, very chill, relaxing engagement.
Hi, everyone. My name is Diana Chu. I'm the co-founder and executive coach at Refactor EQ. I'm also the interpersonal dynamics facilitator and executive coach for Stanford Graduate School of Business as well. So I work with executives all the time and seeing their companies, how they grow and scale. So this is a really great topic to talk about.
Oh, I'm really excited to have you here, Diana. Thank you for being here. Okay, and number 3 on our list, I do this with some degree of trepidation, my co-author, co-conspirator, cellmate sometimes, Mr. Andreas Wieman. Andreas?
Hey, yeah, I don't know what to say. I thought you were gonna, take over the panel discussion solo there for a second with that intro. But no, in all seriousness, we're very passionate about the topic of employee engagement and the outcomes that are derived from good employee engagement. So looking forward to having a great panel discussion with Kevin, Diana, and Trent that you're going to introduce next, and look forward to participation from the audience as well. So looking for a good, healthy conversation.
All right, awesome. And Trent Salvaggio, PhD, Dr. Trent, joining us here. Thanks, Trent, for being here today. Really appreciate it. the crowd
Absolutely.
noise.
Thanks for having me. Yes, my name is Trent Salvaggio. I am a research scientist. It's great. I'm a research scientist by training. My PhD is in management and organizational development, but my focus area is in an emerging field known as people analytics. And most of my research has centered around the future of work and what that means, not only for the people and employee side of it, but for us as leaders within organizations, and what that changing future of those interactions really look like.
And it's great, Trent, because I don't think it could be any more timely. I mean, given everything that we're dealing with globally. And I want to point out to people that if you've never attended one of our seminars before, this is a global audience. We have people from Asia, Europe, Africa, and US and Latin America participating today. So, I mean, it gives us that opportunity to really talk about this employee problem, but also think about it on a global scale. You know, the cultural nuances that are different in different markets that come with this. And for those of us that like to consider ourselves practitioners in this space, it's a time of tremendous change. So with that, let me just kind of tee up why we wanted to bring this together. As I mentioned earlier, you know, it was a great report done by Gallup in the beginning of the year that started to put some data around how employees are engaged with work. And of course, if you put your business hat on as a CEO or a CFO, you're got to be thinking about, wow, I mean, I have resources that I'm spending money on that are operating at 30% effectiveness. You know, set aside the human factor for a second, but just think about it as the investment and the assets of your business or your organization as a nonprofit, whatever. That's a huge problem. And, you know, that just means that I'm essentially
I think, Tim, you're getting a little choppy, guy. Well, I think technology is going to be one of the things that we talk about, right?
Yes, it is.
Diana and what's that? I'm sorry.
We lost you for like a second. We're going in and out.
Okay. So I apologize for that for just a quick second, but just to get things teed off, again, the purpose of the call is to really look at what are we dealing with today? What do we think is coming down the pipe? And also some thoughts on what we think best practices in today's world are that will lead us to a better place. And of course, part of that is defining what success is around that. And at least as the moderator, I have an opinion about that, but I'm going to turn that over to the panel here. And again, I want to acknowledge that the panel brings different viewpoints, which is why they're here. Trent and Diana are, you know, what I would consider professionals in the organizational psychology of understanding how people interact, how people operate, both at a academic and a almost clinical level. Diana, I'd almost call sometimes what you do is almost clinical in a way. But then Kevin and Andreas bring very hardcore operational experience in managing thousands of employees underneath them, and the practical aspects of trying to take these tools and actually implement them at scale. And so, again, that's the purpose, what we're trying to get to today. Again, there's probably not a magic wand at the end of this conversation, but hopefully we can get people thinking differently outside the box, and the importance of talking about, if nothing else, getting the conversation started around what does employee engagement, employee well-being mean, and business. Maybe I'll turn it over again. I'm going to start with you, Kevin, first, and maybe you could give us a few, 5 minutes or so on your thoughts as we've been talking about this for the last 5 years. So go for it, my friend.
Great. Thanks, Tim. I appreciate it. Well, from my perspective, certainly remote work, RTO, and hybrid are the hot things going on driving the employee experience today. And most organizations, of course, have a mix of all three of these and really are kind of unable to settle into any single approach unless you follow the Amazon model, as they recently have done with a little blunt force approach, just saying everybody's coming back and that's what we're doing. But that's not necessarily an enhancer to employee experience. And that, I think, is compounded as many organizations have gotten larger, right? And they operate across many locations and many time zones. And with that, it stretches the limits and the effectiveness of any single approach to EX, because as you move across time zones and locations, you've got different cultural things taking place within those areas where those businesses are located and within the businesses themselves, even within the same country. And I think there's further pressure on EX that's created by the scarcity of workers. McKinsey recently came out with a report on this, that worldwide there's a dearth of workers, and adding work pressure on those currently employed is that pressure that they can't get people in to do the work. So scarcity itself, I think, is driven in part by a lack of engagement by those workers sitting on the labor sidelines. And the EX experience is important, and it becomes a bigger challenge when companies are unable to meet the market demands due to a shortage of workers. That means There's a lot of overtime and things happening inside of their business to try to meet that demand that doesn't necessarily contribute well to that experience. In regards to technology, I think technology brings that opportunity to make work easier and remote work even more effective. On the flip side, it also reduces that need for physical proximity and often the need for synchronous interactions, which are two things that help build relationships amongst workers and ideation in the office place. So all of this impacts EX as workers find technology liberating on one hand and a bit isolating and divisive on the other. And the key, of course, is to deploy technologies with the consideration of how to maintain or even increase that opportunity for interactions through workflow dependencies and other things to ensure that there is some level of peer-to-peer and leadership touch points that are fostered and encouraged to drive a better EX. And I believe we need to remember the mantra, people, process, tools, and we need to ensure that we always lead with people. And of course, all of this impacts employee well-being, mental health. It's difficult to build an EX culture in a supportive work environment with the deadlines and demands of daily work. But any efforts we undertake to do it need to be very deliberate, very constructive, strategic, as well as tactical.
Excellent. I think that's a great kickoff, Kev. I appreciate that. So, Diana, from your perspective, as you think about the challenges you face in your day-to-day practice, what do you think what we're dealing with here? I mean, like, this current world is chaotic, or feels chaotic to me anyway.
Well, and the Silicon Valley, the buzzword will be AI, in the past year. So a lot of like my CEOs, executives are really talking about like, how can I incorporate AI in my company, right? And how do I do that in a way that like doesn't turn my employees off, right? So there's a lot of like talk about, okay, how can we do pilot program? How can we incorporate in different departments? And so that like it's not like a threat to the employees. One thing that we always talk about is because of like the use of technology right now is there is a space that we can add into, which is like inclusivity. So because with the use of technology, we can tailor the experience in a different way to include different, needs, the cultures, of the employees. Their ability to work, like for example, like their time zones would be different, and like how some people are night owls, some people are morning birds. Like how can you, use that as an advantage to increase productivity by giving them what they want and understanding their needs are. And so creating that like flexibility, creating that inclusivity model is one of the things that like I think in the long run, 5-10 years is actually possible to do with AI, with like all these trends and technology there's a boom here. Yeah. So in some ways, I see that, like, I guess like a lot of the companies I work with are mostly tech companies. And so I strongly believe that, like, without the tech, the company is going to be lagging behind.
Right. Right.
So it is like really important to think about how to incorporate it within the workforce, and how can you introduce that to the workforce as soon as possible.
I liked your comment though about how do you bring in the technology without it feeling threatening? And this is not a new problem. I mean, if you go back when they automated the auto manufacturing, those factories used to employ thousands and thousands of people, and now they employ hundreds, if not tens. And and how does that look, and how do people feel about the impact on their career, their ability to retire, right? Like, these are all topics of the day that people are stressing about. So I think it's a really valuable point of view, and I think it's something that also gets lost sometimes in the C-level conversation doesn't realize the ripple effect on some of these things sometimes. So,
yeah.
Excellent. So, hey, Andreas, I know I'm going to have to work hard to shut you up at the end here, but how about 5 minutes of, what do you think the current world looks like?
Golly, well, one, passive aggressiveness, it needs to decline a little bit there. No, I think what Kevin said with what Diana said too, it's figuring out how do you operationalize technology. I think Diana is absolutely right. We've got all the tech and data that's out there. Data is a big piece of it, by the way. We're swimming in data. There's so much data. I gotta be careful. I'm profane sometimes when I get very passionate about something. There's so much data that's out there, but how do you incorporate that to make better, more probable decisions? And how can you look at it? A lot of companies that we work with always tend to jump to the customer side or the client side of things, and they don't face that technology inward for employees. So if you think about what Kevin said and what Diana said, why wouldn't you start with your employees, have better adoption? That's the other thing with technology, is you got to have adoption. If you have adoption, then guess what? It's less threatening to people because they're using it and they get a level of familiarity with it. But then you start seeing acceptance, and then you see the productivity improvements from it because proficiency is gained and that level of comfort is met. And guess what? When people are comfortable, they're not coffee break badging in or doing this return to office, whatever. They're invigorated by what they're doing, and they're getting the companies are getting a volunteered effort. They're not getting a forced effort, which is measurable, by the way. You can look at the difference between doing just enough to fly under the radar, like we say, versus someone who's very passionate and engaged, like you said, right from the Gallup report, state of the world work, I think is what it's called, that we'll share out. But it's looking at people and now having the technology and data to make it individualized. That's the other thing too. We talk about customer experience a lot and being individual. Customers want to be individuals. They want to be recognized. And then what do we do? What do companies do? They turn around and genericize everything for the employees. Like, here's this one process, everybody's got to follow it. And it kind of loses the value there. And that's where you feel like a cog in the bigger machine. When we have all of the tools right now from a technology perspective, the data perspective, we can communicate so much better now, yet it's not always harnessed in the right way. So that's kind of my viewpoint. So here, I'm stopping now, so you don't have to like give me the hand signal to be quiet. I'll give Trent some time.
Yeah, well, the Spotify won't let you use the hand signals we normally use for timing out. But I think that's really pretty cool what you're talking about there, and I think it really lends itself to what Diana and Kevin was saying, which is that the environment is changing, right? Kevin, like you were talking about, there isn't a model anymore, whether it's return to office, whether it's hybrid, whether it's fully virtual, whether it's mix of contract and employees and 1099s, and the list goes on. There's all this customization, let's call it that for the moment. And Diana, I love one of the things you brought up, which was the night owl versus the early bird versus, and it's really hard when people are forced kind of against their natural inclination, because then they're uncomfortable. And when they're uncomfortable, then they start disengaging and looking for the next job. And of course, Andreas, and we talk all the time, but the data part is really important because that gives you the ability to not just speak with gut instinct, but to actually talk to what's important and what's relevant. So Trent, now that we got all that set up, you got to bring it to a close for us here. No pressure, no pressure
No,
at
I
all.
Exactly. I appreciate everybody taking the good points. So I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage here because most of my focus is on the future of work and trying to understand what work's going to look like next year, 5 years down the road. But in order to do that, I have to understand what the current state of work is. And we've hit on a couple of important things. I think there's two big things that are going on right now that help us understand the world of work. The first, of course, is
Up.
Yeah, I think it froze for a second.
and then
Trent, we lost you there for a second. Could you go back to your
10
first point?
seconds.
Yes. Sorry. Am I back live now?
I think you're okay.
Okay. No, I say that the two big influences right now that I see driving current state of work and the future of work. The one that we've talked about already, technology. It's impossible to have a conversation now without mentioning AI in some form. And Andreas started to touch on this a little bit too, not just about the technology that's available, but the rate of adoption and acceptance of new technologies in our work environments is at the fastest pace we've ever seen. The second part, I think probably the part that doesn't get talked about as much is also people's relationship with work and what work really means to them. And if we go back even just 20 years ago, work was very transactional. It was an honest day's labor, honest day's pay, and that was it. At 5 o'clock, we clocked out and we went home. And what we see today is that relationship with work is much more complex. When we try to model out what it means and what work and how work infiltrates our daily lives, it's not just that transactional. It's about organizational alignment, about being a part of something bigger than yourselves. One of the things that we see when we start talking about employee experience are the need for cultural and values alignment with who you work for.
Yeah.
20 years ago, that wasn't a concern. And now I have to ask myself before I go into work, when I come in, is what I'm doing helping to do something that I believe? Is it helping to further something that maybe outside of my typical work and what I influence? But I want to make sure that what I'm doing isn't causing somebody else pain down the road. I want to make sure that I'm doing something not just for my good, but for the greater good. And when you have that multidimensional perspective and all these different things working together, it creates a really interesting future work.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think it, unfortunately, I have two daughters, 29 and 32, are kind of like right in that space. And you talk to them about work, and it's a very different conversation than what I grew up with. As a boomer, it was like, you're going to pay me? Okay, I'll go do it. Right. Like that was the extent of the complexity of the thought. If it was an oil company, who cared if they were destroying the world? They were paying me to do whatever. But now, of course, it's much more. It's like, who am I working with? And to your point, what are we doing? And it's interesting because what I get paid or the comp number is lower down the decision tree than it used to, or was for me anyway, right? Like mine used to be at the top, like what's the dollar number? But here it's the other things that are much more important. And it's fascinating too, because the little things that we used to just accept, I guess, like a bad supervisor or sometimes some toxic stuff in the work environment, but if it wasn't directly in my face, you just kind of put up with it. Those are less tolerated now, and they're less tolerated in maybe the worst way possible, that people are like, I just go get another job. And of course, with the virtual world, my ability to get another job is dramatically different now than it was even 5 years ago, right? Like, because now I'm on the global stage, I can go look for jobs anywhere in the world, not just within 30 miles of where I'm sitting. And it's really an interesting conversation that I think it's going to be pertinent to what we're talking about here today, because like you said, it's this complex set of interactions, right? Like work is not just that transactional go, get on the 6 o'clock train to work, and I come home on the 6 o'clock train, and I leave work at work. Now in a world where, and I laugh about it, but we're on 20, and you saw the Kevin O'Leary comments, what was it, last week? We're in Australia now. You cannot call your employees outside of hours, right? It's a national law. And he's like, well, that's bullshit. I should be able to call my employees anytime that I want to. And I'm kind of like of the other side. And we did a project in Brazil in 2016, and we were in a meeting, and it was lunchtime, and they actually turned off the access for the lunch hour for the non-exempt, for the exempt employees. I mean, for the non-exempt employees. So the people that were subject to overtime rules and everything else, they can't log into their systems until the start of workday. They get a forced break at lunch, and at 5 p.m., well, actually at 6 p.m., they turn out the lights in the office to chase people out. So you can argue that's maybe a little bit draconian on the other side of the coin, but it actually kind of makes sense that we want people to not be so workaholic that they burn out, because that's, I think, part of the other extreme of that. Anyway, not to overly dominate, but I mean, if we think about all those different aspects, and I think this was great because it's a very balanced view of what's going on in the employee space today. If you had to pick, one thing that, and I know we talked about AI, and we talked about technology, and I'm going to pull an AI card out. We've been talking about AI in different formats, even as artificial intelligence, for decades. We had conditional logic tools before that. We've had all kinds of tools implemented. For example, like onboarding process is a great one, which is generally broken, right? For most companies, they would complain that my new employee onboarding process is suboptimal, and right away breaks the relationship right off the first bat. We've been dating, through the hiring process. I love you, I love you, I love you. And then, hey, good luck. Mm-hmm. And don't call me if you have a problem. Here's somebody else's number to call. And that kind of, starts the deterioration of your relationship right off the bat. But yet something as simple, what should be as simple as onboarding a new employee, seems to be very broken in a lot of places. So if you guys think about that, what would be the things that you think are, like, if you had to pick one thing on your list, what would be the thing that you'd want to lean in on most? And let me start again in the same order. I mean, Kevin, what would you think about would be your top of list activity to go after?
Well, I think you're calling out the onboarding would be the area, and it is the area right now that we're focusing on significantly. We're 100% work from home, and so the onboarding process had to be adapted to that, and it took place in the midst of the pandemic, right? And then it's continued on. So having that sense when they join us, they come on board, they get their equipment, and then we immediately send them home, right, to do their training, and they go through a 4-week training cycle. So we've been real deliberate about ensuring we're touching those folks on a regular basis, setting them up with a mentor buddy as well as a tech support, so that through that period of training, when they're in training with people throughout the health system, right, it isn't just from their particular work area. So they feel like a stranger amongst strangers in that regard. But we make sure that we do a regular touch with them each day, and then recaps with them at the end of the week. And then twice during that training cycle, we'll bring them on site so that they can meet some of their work peers that they work with remotely, as well as their leadership group. And that has been effective for us. So that's an area that we continue to put a lot of effort into, because we feel strongly if we start out on the right foot, that turning that retention of that associate into a long-term thing becomes a bit more realistic.
Awesome. And Diana, if you were going to pick one thing based on all the conversations you have, I'm kind of fascinated to hear what it might be.
Well, for me, I'm a little biased because I coach executives. So for me, it's also the root of the problem. It's always the decision makers, right? So how can we make the decision makers, the leaders of the company, to be more empathetic and emotional intelligent, so that they could have like more resilience when dealing with crisis and adaptability, to be able to like, troubleshoot when these type of like scenarios kind of come in play. Because like there's no one size fit all kind of format. Like it might work in one company of like like on the onboarding process, for example, but it might not work for the specific company. And so understanding their own strengths and their weaknesses and be aware of like where they are in how they scale and the team dynamics would be really important to be able to bring that leadership into the employee experience and to improve that piece. Because like without a leader that understands their own employee, it will be really hard to make change, effective change. So having that piece, it's they can't be just thinking about the profit, like the P&L, but also about like the impact of the lives that they're looking at and holding. And so always getting that balance will be important.
Yeah. Wow. Well, on the headlines on any given day, I see more of the people who are struggling with that. But we also don't read about the very successful ones that are actually doing what you're talking about, and they're out there. Andreas, what do you think? What would be your
first, I just want to say thanks for putting me after Kevin and Diana. It makes it so much easier for me to answer, and then I have Trent to like figure out what he's going to say at the end. I don't know who did the drawing and the order on that. Maybe it was Ann Isa in the background. Thank you guys.
It's me. I'm just putting you in the awkward spot that I can. That's what it was all about.
No, it's the opposite of it. But seriously, I agree with what Kevin and Diana were saying, and I look at it as like, what is the one focal that is going to have the biggest positive ripple effect that's going to spread out with it? If you had to do something in like 4-week time period, right? I think it's engagement. And how do you leverage the technology, the tools, whether it's engagement, like Kevin was saying on the onboarding. I mean, the first thing you're doing is courting this new employee, and then they go into like training, on the job training or production life cycle, and you're like, all right, here, hey, we're cutting costs. There's middle management, so we have less managers, so your ratios are going up. So now instead of having a team of like 8 people I'm responsible for as a manager, I got 18 people. And then we're going to measure stuff not the right way and spend our time disparately, not with the brand new people. So I think the engagement is, how can we leverage technology that's out there and emerging and isolate is probably not the best adjective, identify the right individual attributes of what we need to do to engage with those individuals. Like, it gets back in my mind to individualism. And if you take the data and technology and you point it in the right direction to give you the clues of who you need to focus on as leaders, all the way up to Diana's spot on with the executives, I think there's this environment that used to be, we can kind of like fuddle through it and things kind of worked out, and I think that was much more around correlation, environmental, circumstantial correlation. And a lot of people in their mind, senior executives, attribute it to causation, which it's really, really difficult to get the causation with the amount of data that you need to actually get there. But I think once you have the technology, the data, and you can figure out a way to operationalize that with your employees and drive that engagement when it's a new employee, to Kevin's point, vitally, vitally important. You think about the cost to recruit, train, and then hire them, right? And then for them to be productive and stick around. So you recoup that investment, but then also make them happy about being here. And that way you have less people that attrit out, and you don't have to go through that whole, cycle again. So I think engagement is the one of everything that we've been through pre-pandemic, leading into the pandemic, and now coming out of it. Engagement is so important. And I think we'll have a lot more solutions and possibilities if we up our game with engagement, because I think everybody's going to be more collaborative and comfortable and trust each other a little bit more to find solutions and try new things.
Yep. I agree. Mr. Trent, sir.
So as the quant-based guy, I have to make things just overly complex. And what I've seen here, and most of the research, at least within the last year, are really pointing to 2 things that we can look at this on. One is on that individual dyadic level, and the other is from the organizational level. And so what I mean on that dyadic level, we've already touched on this a little bit, but what's important that we need to really lean in on is that individualized attention. Nobody wants to feel like they're just a cog in the wheel, right? And as leaders within our organizations, I see a lot of times that we start leaning on those tools that we have, like technology, to try to replace those deep bonds that need to be built early on in order for employees to truly be engaged in the work and to identify with what they're doing. But that's not enough. We also have to analyze this from the organizational level. And what just came out within probably the last 3 weeks was really impressive research of what's important when you're looking for a new job. And number one is always salary. It always has been. But for the first time, the number two most important thing was organizational trust. They wanted to make sure the organization was a good organization, that they had some sort of job security, that they were able to come in there and identify with that organization and believe that they are going to be there when employees need them most. And 3 years ago, this wasn't even on the radar. And for this to be one of the number two reasons of deciding whether or not to take a job, I mean, that's something like we haven't seen before. And I don't think it's something that's got a lot of attention yet, because it's easier to build trust on individual relationships, right? How do I make my organization trustworthy, though? And that's the function of the executive team. And making sure that we're out there walking the walk, talking the talk, and doing those things that really matter, and making sure that people see that we're actively not just giving it, FaceTime, not just but actually doing it for the right reasons, because we do what we believe and we do these things because they're the right things to do. Mm-hmm. And it's not just about a P&L anymore.
No, I think that's it's really important, but it's also a really hot topic, right? Like, it's even at the political level of woke versus, what is woke versus DEI versus, some of these other terms, which I think get used, in almost an accusatory way in some ways, like, because that's never the underlying intent. But I love what you're saying about the organizational trust piece of being more and more important. It gets back to what we were talking about earlier, where people think about, what do I do? Who do I do it with before they even get to how much I'm going to get paid? And which really changes the dynamics at a leadership level, because it used to be, we used to say in the maritime industry, you just keep throwing $100 bills down the smokestack and eventually everything gets fixed. That doesn't work anymore, because that's not good enough. And so I think that's a great segue into the second part of the conversation, which is, okay, that's kind of what we see as the challenges today. As we look forward, and I think, Trent, this is where you really lean in, is where do we see some of this stuff going, and what is the impact of it? Because you're right, it's radical change. Diana, you're talking about executive skill set that was never important for a very long time, right? You need to be MBA, you had great financial thing, you could talk to the investors, you could go to it, you could share your vision with the analyst effectively. That was your job, right, at the top of the pyramid. And people were just like the fungible assets that were part of the mix of making that up. And now that's radically shifting, and for many different reasons, right? And both good and some that maybe we don't have control over. But as we think about where this challenge is going to be, in the next 5 years, I was going to say 5 to 10 years, but 10 years, who knows, right? But with so much changing so quickly, and in fact, all of you are directly involved in that. Where do you see us in 5 years? What do you think that's going to look like? And again, just to mix it up here a little bit, maybe I can start with Trent first, and we'll go backwards through the list so that Andreas doesn't feel quite like he's third man on the totem pole.
That was a compliment, by the way. Like, where I was perfect. So I'm
going to screw it up now, because now it's going to be harder for you.
Yeah. So when I start trying to think about the future of work, a lot of it comes back to something that Kevin said in his intro: scarcity. And not just the scarcity of workers, but the scarcity of skills. So we talked about technology and the rate of adoption and how quickly things are going to half-life of skills within our organization. And we used to have this half-life of skills, of usable skills, was 7 to 10 years. And now that we're seeing this rapid adoption of new technologies, that usable window of skills is 1 to 2 years before they become obsolete. So as leaders within the organization, the question now becomes, who is responsible for a lifetime of learning? If we know that our entire workforce are going to need to upskill or reskill within the next 18 months, at least in some area of their work, what does that mean for us as leaders in the organization? If we want to remain competitive, we have to make sure that our skills are constantly evolving. Does that mean that learning and development starts to take a much bigger role in our organization? Do we as leaders is it our responsibility to push that new knowledge out? Or on the other side, is it the employee's responsibility to keep up with that pace of change? Should we expect them to go out there and engage in the activities they need to constantly have the skills that they're going to need for not just their job today, but the job that they might have in 6, 8, 12 months as it continues to change? And for right now, I mean, it's an unknown question, right? We know it needs to happen. We see it happening every single day, but how are we going to manage that in the future?
You know, it's really fascinating. We were just having this conversation in my household recently about when I was in my early, 20s and 30s, companies had pretty robust ongoing continuing education programs. You know, it was not unusual to get an MBA paid for, or at least partially paid for. And now it's less and less of that because, again, it's about budget. We don't know that and it's also an investment because you kind of think about, I'm going to invest in Tim. Is he still going to be here 3 or 4 years from now? Because that was the flip side of it. So, you go and you get the degree, and yet the company's not prepared for you to actually exercise those new skills they've invested in. So what do? You go look for another job with that new degree. So, I think it's, and then of course the onus is, who is the onus on? Is it the individual, or is it on the organization? And then of course that creates other unique balances there. So, I think it's fascinating that you brought that one up because it's just very recently that we've been involved in that. So Andreas, so where do you think that this is all going? I mean, what do you think we're going to be in 5 years?
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with Trent. And again, I go back to what Kevin said about the comment about scarcity. So how do you prevent scarcity from occurring, right? You figure out, how do you take what you have and how do you protect it, and then obviously grow it, make it abundant, right? And so if you talk about this exact topic, I'm really, really passionate about this one too. Alt skilling, right? We used to call it reskilling, and you train people at the core of their job, and then that's it. That they don't get any more training or an upgrading or a system change occurs, so you got to train them on that. Rather than looking at it like, how can you, with all of the dynamics in the environment today, how can you build on the core characteristics that employees possess, and how can you incrementally build on them? Because then if you do that, and this goes back to my engagement, which is why I was saying it starts with engagement, you have that level of trust. And now if you have that level of trust, then you know what? If you don't immediately have an application of the skill set, the alternative skill set that you just provided this employee for, and they can't use it right now at this moment, guess what? That level of appreciation that they have and that volunteerism, right? They're not voluntarily looking for a job. They're voluntarily looking for solutions with the work they're doing right now because they care and they're passionate about you, which means they're not doing what? They're not quitting. So that means you have to spend less money on recruiting and hiring and training and all this other stuff on that end. You have a known quantity. I'm going to sound a bit commodity-based when I explain it like this, but it's about the people. You have this person, this individual who you're investing in. And you know what? I used to actually be a practitioner of this too. So I'm not just like theorizing here. I would tell people, I would go meet all my new hire classes, every single one of them. And I would tell them, look, if you can give me 12 months or 24 months of showing up on time, giving me your all, and letting us know, raising your hand when you think there's a problem. I don't care if I have 25 people in this class raise their hand and say, yeah, we got a problem here. I need to know about it so I can help solution it and work with my team and collaborate with my team. But if you give me 12 months, because at the time, this is contact center industry, which if you guys know, the annual attrition rate in contact center is like 110, 120% turnover. If I got 12 months in good performance and attendance from an employee, that actually saves me quite a bit of money. And I was also doing the right thing for the employee. And that's what I was focused on, was doing the right thing for the employee. The byproduct was good P&L delivery. But if I stayed focused on continuing to build on their skill set in independent logic and decision making and the attributes for good habit formation and all kinds of other attributes there, I engaged with them, then the level of effort that they exuded in the loyalty that they demonstrated, again, was 100% measurable. So I think we need to revert back to, and exactly what Trent was saying, I would say we have scarcity, so we need to protect that and we need to grow that. I think we should take more of a proactive approach to alternative skilling and doing it with the technology and the data that we have. If we do that, the people we have right now are going to be happy, they're going to stay longer. And then guess what? You're going to attract more people to you rather than you having to go out and find them.
Yeah. No, that's a really important one. And it kind of changes a lot of things when you think about your employee base that way. So Diana, where do you think we're going to be in the 5 years from now? All on the beach, I hope.
Like the company is going to have a spectrum. There's going to be, one side of the company on the tail end is like, I churn and burn, I'm just going to go through as much and, like our employees potentially burn out and like they will leave and it's okay, right? That's like one model. But I think what will actually, gear towards like a healthy dynamic is like a human-centric culture. So understanding using technology as an enabler to provide that support for the employees, or even like the data that like the employees collected for the employees to improve their job opportunities and like where they could grow, like what Trent have said in terms of learning, whatnot. Like I think like the human-centric culture will be, the next phase in the workforce, because no longer people are thinking about like just the salary. They're also thinking about like, is my manager a good person to work for? Do I like the team? Do I get what I need in terms of flexibility in my workforce? In my workday, and I think that becomes more and more valuable in the long run. If employers are able to provide that type of support, like prioritizing mental health, providing like support and like HR, normalizing burnout experiences, supporting them in terms of like when something comes up in terms of tech, there's a support system on leveling them up if they choose to want to do that. And I think that will create like more creative and strategic work in the long run for the future. So that's what I'm seeing and gearing towards in the next 5 years, because the more that we use technology, the potential pitfall is that we get more and more disengaged. And so the companies that could actually shine are the ones that could adopt it in a way that could engage the employees.
I think that's a great point, since it's funny, everybody's kind of leaning in kind of the same general area. So Kev, open for you to kind of close it up for us here, where you think we're going to be 5 years from now.
Yeah, well,
you and I are on a beach with having Mai Tais. I got that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's interesting. I love the comments that have come forth so far, and especially Andreas put his finger on it. He didn't use this word, but I'll call it variety of work experience, right? So whether you upskill or the training, whatever, there needs to be, to drive that engagement, it needs to go from the global 30,000 foot level, right, Gallup, those types of things, driven down to the local level, because people thrive in local, and giving people a variety in their work experience is what helps engage them. And that can only be done at that local level. And, Trent talked about people's wanting to align their values alignment with where people work, and understanding that. And you also have a component of the workforce that's I think is continuing to grow, that even ask, why do I need to work? Shouldn't there be some type of a program that provides an income for me that I can go in and out of work as I see fit and not have to worry about it? So those are different dynamics. So leadership, which is what Diana kind of wrapped it up with, is the key thing. Leadership can't be outsourced. It can't be automated. And this doesn't mean that people won't try to do that, right? But you can resource your leadership, right? We all know the wisdom that people lead managers, and leadership's role is critical in EX. One of the things we talk about here is we'll work hard. You'll have tough days, you'll have rough days, but we're building a culture and pushing what I like to call leadership humanitas, right? That actually, at the end of the day, when you get home, you'll want to pet your dog rather than kick it because you work here. So even though you had a bad day, you wouldn't want to have that bad day any place other than where it is with the people you've had it with, because of the support and the leadership that you work with. So I think some of the basics are treat everyone with respect, provide training and role models, reinforce the right behaviors, and hold people accountable for the wrong ones. And technology can leverage that.
That's a great wrap up, Kev. And I think, I think you're right on. But let me kind of turn this around a little bit and a question for you guys, because as you're talking about this, this concept of being, a human-centric organization, we want to understand the individual needs versus the gestalt of a persona and yada, yada, yada. Well, at the same time, you work with these organizations, they're eliminating middle management jobs because, there's a question about the value of the middle manager as in these organizations. I'm working with a client in Europe right now, 51,000 employees in a huge supermarket chain, and their HR team is 20 people. So, and again, it boils down to the investment versus the need. And, these same companies will go and spend millions of dollars on AI. I'm not even sure what it does, but they'll pay it, they'll do it. But how does that transition to the investment into the most critical resource that they have, which is what we were just talking about, this human person? So, a question for you guys. Do you see an evolution in organizational structure to support this more human-centric approach? Trent, you seem like you might have some thoughts on this.
No, it's funny that we bring this one up. So future of work, I'm always looking for those key indicators that can point us in the direction of what we need to focus on. And we talk about how technology is not just changing how we do work, but changing work itself, and changing what work really means. And when we talk about technology, but the first thing to look at is what effect does that have on the current jobs that even exist? And we're seeing jobs that didn't exist 2-3 years ago now becoming commonplace. And one of the leading indicators that I see about the future of work is this uptick in roles specifically dedicated to talent management itself. And we've always looked at management as a job that somebody else, you did it within your job. There was nobody who was just the person in charge of managing. We never had a chief management officer. But now we're starting to look at that specialized set of skills of leading in organizations and understanding its importance. And important enough that we're now carving out individual roles for people as a chief talent management officer. That doesn't tell us just how important people are in the future of work when we talk about human-centered design and how unimportant technology is going to be. Because again, technology is not going to be a source of competitive advantage. It's a commodity. No. Everybody has access to technology that we would have never dreamed of having 3-4 years ago. And so what's going to set us apart is not the technology, it's the people who are using that technology and the people who are willing to come in and work not for a paycheck, like Andreas was saying, but give their blood, sweat, and tears because it's what they want to do. They believe in what they're doing and they're treated well within that organization and they feel that sense of belonging.
Anybody else on that? Because I have a follow-up question that I'm holding back on.
No, I agree. And I think it's kind of interesting, Trent, what you just said and what Diana was saying on the last question is you've got the technology and you've got the people. Now, Trent, your comment and observation is these new roles that are coming up, and it's less on the ambiguous management title, but I see it more as the importance of taking technology and operationalizing that technology to the people. And once you can figure that out, and like, look, it's not the old day where you can have like one wash, rinse, and repeat type of process, and you can just pick that up in any vertical or industry, put it in there, and it kind of somewhat works. There's a whole bunch of different dynamics that are going on right now in what we're seeing. Even like what Kevin was saying, generationally, it's really interesting. If you look at a lot of the senior executives, I would say right now, are baby boomer and Gen X age, right? Which are more analog. You look at millennials going into Gen Z, they're more digital first. And so now you have a bunch of analog first kind of up and comers, and they were successful during this analog age, but now they're having to adopt this technology with a big workforce that is digital first. And so there's this generational divide right there. And I think the emergence of these roles you're talking about is going to be super key, because they're the ones who can operationalize the technology and find new ways to do things. I don't know how to use all of them. I wish I did. Maybe I would be in Dreamforce this week, hosting that. I'm kidding. But I think it's going to be really exciting as we see these roles share out best practices of what they've learned and what they do. And then you take, I don't know, 40% of what they've done and you customize, like what Kevin said, I'm really, really passionate about. Don't take the 30,000 foot level, go down to that uniqueness, that individual level of, what we do. I'm in Florida, right? Tampa Bay. So Tampa Bay Bucks are 2-0. Tim, what is the Niners? 1-1? Yeah. But here we can do things because of the unique environmental circumstances that are here versus where Tim's at in San Francisco. They got to do things maybe a little bit differently, but that's the beauty of it. You get to be able to collaborate and individualize the approach that you take. And these folks, I think, are going to take the technology, work with their teams, and it's going to be I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be beautiful. There's going to be a lot of new ideas that are going to come out of this. And I think it's going to have a longer development and iterative cycle than I think we've seen in the past, where we kind of got stuck. And now all this new technology, to your point, is kind of coming out. We just have to enable it, like Diana said, with the individuals.
Yeah.
So question for you then again, as I think about these pretty radical shifts, right? Like to your point, Trent, we've got to just not assume management is the thing that gets done when it doesn't, right? And that's a huge problem. We don't train people actually how to supervise and effectively manage. That's a kind of byproduct of you'll figure it out, right? Which is usually a very dangerous way to learn anything. But the other thing that I think is fascinating that you kind of brought up, I thought was interesting, is how would we hire people, right? Like think about the profile. The profile is no longer Tim's an expert in Python, right? And blah, blah, blah. And that's what he's done for 10 years. He's a super coder in Python. That maybe isn't who you need to hire. What you need to hire is somebody who is a rapid adapter to doing new things and problem solving. And I have an ongoing complaint about talent acquisition all the time. And it's like talent acquisition is broken at the point of the job description. I mean, it's kind of like when you see a job description for Gen AI and you have to have 10 years of experience. And you're like, I'm sorry, like that just doesn't exist. But, and it just shows you the disconnect on this robotic approach to talent acquisition, that are we even looking at what talent is, right? Like talent in the past might have been experience and you've done it, right? You built a contact center, therefore I'm going to hire you to build another one. Whereas maybe that's not the attributes that you're really looking for. You're looking for somebody who's got passion, and someone who can adapt and is a learner, right? Because those are the ones that might be the long-term investment for a company. But then, Diana, what you were saying too is there's also a space in companies for those people that are, individual contributors, almost experts in their field. They churn and burn. They come in, then they spend their 18 months, and then they're going to burn out, and they're going to move on to another company or another organization, and maybe they do the same thing or whatever. But you need both, and maybe there's this core group that you nurture and grow. And not all of them will succeed, right? And you're going to have new people that come in, and that's the nature of it. But
Yeah.
what a radical shift in organizational philosophy that would represent. If Diana, your leader has to be not only, this kind of, and I know the founder management style is kind of a buzz thing going on right now. And,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of back and forth on that, right? Like, yes, it's great when you have people that are knowledgeable and are in the weeds and they know exactly what the product does and the customer experience and everything around that. But it can also lead to toxic behaviors as well that don't allow for the growth of the organization and the encouragement of all of that. So
No.
as you think, go ahead, Diana.
So Tim, one of the points about like that I brought up about human-centered culture, one thing that like kind of like a pros and cons, like the cons of it is that like once that human interaction get developed, for example, a middle management to an employee or like a leader to middle management, whatever dyad or like the group dynamic that is developed, once that person left, typically it becomes a vacuum.
Right.
In that kind of model. So when looking into like human-centered approach, it's really important to do like succession planning, future-proof leadership. Thinking about, okay, if that person get replaced or that person like out of the job or shift roles, how can I still create that dynamic that is not just adhere to that one person, but the institutional, what we call is like institutional transference. I understand that I could still be taken care of not just by Tim, but it's by the company. Like the culture of the company. So that's the goal. But it's really thinking about like how can we create that. So like just tying that back in because you're talking about like hiring. The next bench of people, but also like a succession planning from within.
No, that's really
quick?
important. No, you can't. Go ahead.
All right. Well, I'm going to anyways, regardless of moderator. No, what Diana just said is so important. Like the way that I look at it is I call them spheres of influence, right? So you find people that make a big impression that people listen to, that they're kind of natural leaders. And in that way, you kind of use them as a conduit, and then you build up that trust factor, et cetera, and development, et cetera, et cetera. But I think now we're in a time that's kind of the older way of going, but Diana is absolutely right. When you have that one key sphere of influence and you don't have that developmental attitude with as many individuals on the team as possible, you get back to the scarcity factor. So now you have a scarce, resource. And then, by the way, maybe I want to be a scarce resource because then I have more time and attention, to be able to do things that are going to get me recognized and promoted, more money and whatever. We're shifting now to where I think more and more individuals, if you listen to them anyways, they want to share, they want to be heard, they want to be able to, Tim's favorite word, influence. They want to be an influencer, because I genuinely believe, and I see it in practice too, people want to do good. They want to help other people be successful. I think we're seeing, again, I think this goes back to the generational shift where, like, I'm a Gen Xer, right at the cutoff of 80, by the way. So maybe almost a millennial. But it was kind of an attribute to be a scarce resource because you were the only one. When there was a problem, they came to you. Now, I think you're seeing more people want to help each other more naturally, and we haven't really got to a good dynamic, again, because of the generational sliding and the norms and that culture that needs to change to have more and more positive ripple effects in these spheres of influence. So that way, when someone does find something else, you're not holding them back from an opportunity. Like, Kevin, how many times have you seen in your career, well, we can't promote you right now because we don't have anybody to do your job, so that'll create the vacuum we're talking about. Just ludicrous.
That happens, Andreas, but back to Diana's point, it's important to develop broad, how would I say that, the leadership in a way that everybody understands the importance of talent development, even without a formal program, right? So if you're my boss and you say, hey, I love you, Kev, but they can't promote you because nobody could replace you, well, let the poor reflection on you.
Yep.
Right? It's not a compliment to me. And I should leave anyways, because what I'm also hearing from you is, well, you're not putting any effort to develop me. let alone anyone else to replace me. And that's a problem.
100% agreed.
I want to go back
yes,
and touch briefly on what Diana had brought up, and maybe this gives a segue, Tim, into the best practices and strategies. But you mentioned that transference, right, of the talent, right, the ability to manage talent well and create an ethos of trust and respect in the organization. I think it's real important that executives take the time to conduct one-on-ones, roundtables, skip levels, this type of thing. I will do that. I will go down 2 or 3 levels and meet with individuals and share my philosophies and strategies, the same talk track that I'm doing to my direct reports, because I want it to kind of sandwich the organization. I want them to understand it as the leaders coming down, but I want people underneath them to understand the culture that we're building as well.
Yeah.
So they push those leaders to get to where we need to be, right? If it's always coming down like this, it gets filtered in such a way that the people at the end that we want to influence the most get a watered down message, as opposed to an opportunity for one-on-ones and getting it straight out. So for whatever that's worth, it seems to work well, and I'm going to keep doing it.
Well, and that's a great point where technology can actually be an enabler for what we're talking about, right? So that you can create that one-to-one without the telephone game in between, and people can hear your words and engage with you about what your vision is, even when they're virtual all over the world, which is, not that uncommon anymore. So yeah, but I think what you guys are talking about, I mean, summing it up, right? Like, we're going to see this kind of evolution of more embedded technology that is hopefully an enabler for the employee to feel more valued, and also for leadership to demonstrate a more human-centric approach. This is where, Andreas, we go in, and you got to have the data to support that, because that is absolutely true. And of course, that's one of the big advantages we have now, right? In the past, we had to do a lot of statistical analysis and guess based on small samples. We don't have to do that anymore, because we can see all of the data. Now, how well we use that data, that's a different problem, but it's all there if we want to take advantage of it. I think, this is a great conversation, and really, I've learned stuff in this, and because it makes me think a little bit differently about some of the conversations I'm going to have with clients. But also, now kind of closing out what we want to do for the session is maybe, what you think the 1 or 2 key best practices, like if you were in front of a new CEO, and let's not make it a startup, because those are kind of unique, but let's say it's an established company, they've got a business, but they're struggling, right? They're struggling with the retention of employees, which drives customer experience problems, blah, blah, blah. Think about hotels, right? Like, they are really going through radical shifts in how they operate. And what does that mean? What would you tell that CEO? What would be the 1 or 2 key things that you'd say, don't lose sight of these things as you go forward? And Kev, let me start with you on this one, if you don't mind.
No, that's great. That's great. Well, I'm going to reach back to a recent McKinsey study on what people said mattered the most to them to motivate performance. And I would tell that CEO or chairperson, whatever it is, that it's really critical to give people a clear and consistent, predictable set of criteria that measures their performance. So when they ask him or her, what do I need to be to do successful? That they can provide a simple framework that gives them something that's 100% within their control. It's criteria that produces an operating result, which helps tie what I do every day to the strategic goals of the organization. And then it needs to be something that's weighted in such a way that if I do it well, those key components, it swings my performance assessment and whatever else that he or she might roll out, whether it's assessment framework or other programs. I think there's 3 things you need to follow, and something I've done throughout my career will continue to do, and it needs to be easy to understand, simple to administer, and effortless to execute. So I think if you focus on those 2 things, you can engage people very quickly because they want to be successful. When they have clarity about how to be successful, they're going to do it.
Excellent. Diana, you do this every day, so I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
For me, it's I'm going to start with really a strong assessment, how are you assessing your company right now? Where is it? Like how, and it gave me a sense of like if the CEO actually have an accurate picture or like a depiction of like where they're at, the perception of the like perception of like how other people see them, and are they able to like see that themselves of like the good and the bad, right? Having that awareness of where they're at is truly important, and then like asking them about like the long-term 5-year goal. So one thing that I would actually bring up a lot is how can you retain people around you, your C-suite, and then influencing the C-suite, and the C-suite influencing like other parts of their org. And so how can they up their influence game? The ability to relate to people while not burnt out by the work and the load of it. And so I ask about like their support system, like who they go to when they have crisis. Do they actually have a contrarian in the room that could bring them, difficult topics and conversations? How do they like deal with like crisis? And what is their default when they lead into a crisis? So those are the things that I think about, because when I think about like a CEO, it is the soul of the company in some ways. It's really about the resilience of that person. The more resilient that person is when they're dealing with crisis and the ability to adapt, the better the org will be. And so, I go into the human piece of that person and then kind of expand into the org. That's how I would look into it.
No, it's a good one. Yeah, and I think an important part of what you were saying there is that ability to get that unfiltered feedback, right? Not just the rose-colored glasses of what people want you to hear, but what's reality, whether it's from your customers or from your staff, et cetera. That's a hard one. I know I've always struggled with that, even though it's meant well. It always feels like, well, what do you mean I'm not good at that? Or, I thought I had that wired. So, Andreas, how about yourself?
I think what Kevin and Diana said make a lot of sense, but I kind of go back to, and Kevin, I think this is kind of what you're getting at. And philosophically, I kind of see it the same way. And Tim, this is going to be no surprise to you, scorecard IQ. So figuring out how do you define success for an organization so that way it hits the attributes that Kevin mentioned, right? They know what it is. If you go back and look at a Bain study, I'll have to find it to link here. But organizational alignment it was really, really low. Like, what is the goal of the company? You get to Diana's point, C-suite, we know exactly what P&L, stock, analysts, coverage, blah, blah. But you get down to the frontline workers that actually operationalize everything, larger companies, and they kind of didn't really know. So I think having an objectively measured system that says, hey, this is important. Here are the things that are important. Here's your contribution as an individual. Here's how you contribute to this. Here's the role that you play. I think if we have clarity there, it opens up all the other possibilities we talked about building trust, about, Kevin brought up another really good point about why do we have to have a structured program? Like, why are you waiting for me to tell you, hey, these are the things that we really need to do? That kind of invites staleness and just box check thinking, right? And I think we saw during the pandemic and the adoption of, I had clients who I probably shouldn't say this. They were really upset because their perception of productivity reduced when they went to work at home, and especially in the training phase. And I'm like, well, let me ask you, did you take your trainers that were in the office before in front of 25 people, training them on something, and then you just gave them Zoom and you said, oh, that's it. You just got to do the same thing there. I'm like, does that make any sense whatsoever? Is that logical? Is that skill set transferable to me, teaching someone remotely like this and not being able to go talk to them, then be able to see my body language and being able to lean in, help, et cetera, et cetera. But you're upset that your fallout rate's higher, your productivity, your speed of competency is longer, and you didn't make any adjustments there. To me, I see that immediately as kind of being lazy. And so I pointed it out, and they were like, well, yeah, we didn't do any of that. We just did what we did in the office and just did it in Zoom. I don't know why I keep doing that, but that's
I don't know. It looks good though. It looks good.
But the point is, I think if you're able to kind of like define what success is and articulate that to the individuals that make up the whole organization. Like, here's another thing that I would do with my team. Some of them may be watching, so maybe they'll get a laugh out of this. We used to do what we call the janitor exercise. This is before the pandemic. And what I would do is task my teams all over the globe, and they were in offices. How would you include the janitor, the cleaning staff into your daily customer experience and employee experience? And they would come up with, oh, they got to clean, they got to make sure this is clean and this and that. And all right. But then inevitably, each team would come up with something like, oh, we would have leadership, meet with the cleaning staff there at the busiest time of the day to greet everybody. Had nothing to do with cleaning. And guess what? We measured productivity and looked at attendance and looked at morale and things like that. All of them improved. But the thing is, they thought outside the box of new ways and challenged traditional ways of thinking to come up with new solutions that help them define, what success would be. But I give them a goal of saying, here's what success is. We need to improve this. It's objectively measurable. We can measure it. Now I want you to figure out what are new ways that we can do this. And that way we had that collaboration. We had the individual, applied logic that was demonstrated. The teams, from Asia would talk to the teams in Latin America. And so we would bring them together and they would come up with these great ideas. But I was able to go back and measure it and show them and say, well, look, first of all, and the real kind of, I had an ulterior motive to this, by the way, but the real key was, all right, if you found a way to have the cleaning staff included in this, why aren't you doing this with training? Why aren't you doing this with HR? Why aren't you doing this with quality assurance and data analytics and things like that? And then the spark kind of went off and it worked as a force multiplier. But I think clearly defining success and what the individual in the organization, literally down to the cleaning staff and the office folks, have clarity for them on what they can do to make a difference and find a way to measure it. And that way you give them feedback, because then again, that stokes the engagement piece of it. And it's not just completely subjective and based off of what you're seeing. It's a little bit more objective. Sorry, that was a little bit long.
I think, no, that's all right, but it's a great point. And I think it's very complimentary to everything that's being said so far. So Trent, close it out, sir, with as you think about, because this really fits in with what you do for a living, what you would give as your best practices guidance to that CEO.
Yeah. So the World Economic Forum puts out an amazing research study every 2 years. It's called The Future of Skills, and always in the top 3 now that we've seen over the last 2 years of reporting, and most research suggests it'll continue there in the future, is one of the most important skills that we can develop is what they call cognitive flexibility. And we touched on this a little bit earlier. It's not just about knowing one thing and being a specialist in it. It's about learning how to learn and thinking in different ways, and questioning everything and not being scared to ask those really hard questions, right? It's really easy for us to go in and say, what's the ROI on a piece of software? And we have established methods for understanding that. It's much more difficult to say, what's my return on investment for building a good relationship with my supervisor today? How much is return for me as an executive to go down and spend 30 minutes on the front line with people, answering their questions, articulating that clear vision of the future so that we're all on that same aligned path on what we're doing and how what I do every day aligns and plays a part in that. And being able to throw away those things that we've always held on to as the truths, those things that you always know, those gut feelings that we do because, well, that's the way we've always done them. And being able to take those things and understand that, yeah, there was a time and a place for them, but maybe that's not now. And being able to be intrinsically able to question yourself, to point out and to understand your own weaknesses, so that you can leverage those things that you do really well that make you uniquely human, uniquely who you are, and to be able to identify where those gaps exist as well. The future of work is uniquely human.
I think all of us would agree with you, Trent, based on the conversations we've been having so far. And, I think about some of the things you were just saying a second ago about learning how to let go of things that no longer fit in our model. Somebody should write a book about that. Oh, wait a minute. I knew the way. Yeah, that was a cheap stab for our Stop Doing Stupid Stuff book, which is exactly in that premise. But
I'll give
again,
you a stab at the end, Tim, plugging for Hopkins, right? Marty McCary just came out with a book on that very topic in the medical industry. Very interesting read. Very interesting.
But and to your point, and then I think about some of the other things that we've said here in terms of themes, right? One I love is defining success. But it kind of goes back is that organizational success definition that you're going to share with everybody has to be one that they can align with, right? If your definition of success is sell 1 million widgets a year, somebody who's interested in how does that impact developing countries or access to food or education is going to go, well, wait a minute, that has nothing to do with that, right? Like that, that this isn't where I want to work if all we're going to do is be about pushing widgets out the door. So again, it gets very interesting as you think about this human-centric where we're all different, right? That's the other part. It's very hard to say it's going to be the same for everybody because all of us are completely different. We respond to stimuli differently, et cetera. We respond, but I was thinking this idea earlier where you end up with this interesting mix of leaders and participants or doers in the organization where you may have different flavors across the spectrum. I like the way to describe that, Diana, of the spectrum, where you could have these people that maybe are your long-term core, are these dynamic learners, Trent, that I'm making up a word, but that ability, cognitive flexibility. I love that. That's like a really good academic term. It makes me feel smart, but it makes sense, right? Like that ability to flex in the way I absorb and process information differently, and therefore I can adjust to different circumstances, which is not the way we've operated, at least through my adult life, right? Like that's not the way people were very much trained like this, you work within the box, not in flexibility. And of course, now we're seeing more of that is you have to be flexible because the circumstances are dynamic. And Andreas uses this term environmental, the impact of external events are beyond your control, but you have to be able to respond to them. You can't just sit there and whine and say, oh, it's the macroeconomic situation is bad. Yeah, no shit, it's bad. It's bad for everybody. It's just now what are you going to do about it that makes a difference. So, I mean, we're right on time here today, and one of the things that I just want to thank all of you for spending an hour and a half of your time with us and bringing decades of experience and academic knowledge and your consulting experience, et cetera. This is hugely valuable, at least to me, and I think to our audience as well. And it's a conversation that I think needs to be, pounded again. And hopefully we could bring this team back together again, maybe in 6 months or so, and say, what have we learned in the last 6 months? And we're also talking about doing a second iteration of this with a more focus on our Asian clients because of the time zone difference. So, it's always difficult to get everybody associated. There was a lot of interest from our teammates in the Philippines, but also from Southeast Asia and Australia as out of this session as well. I guess with that, I just want to thank all four of you for just your openness, and I just think advanced thinking here. This was a PhD class, a PhD seminar, and one of what I think is probably one of the most critical areas of our business evolution that we're going to see in a long time. We talked about how things have evolved, through the information age, and now we're into AI as a technology, but the people piece of this equation is not getting the attention it needs, and that's where it's going to break. All right. Anybody, any last throwouts before we close out here?
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, thank you, Tim.
Diana? Yeah, Trent, Andreas? Oh, go ahead,
Yeah,
Diana.
thank you, everybody. It was a good conversation. We appreciate you having us.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll follow up afterwards. Thank you all.
Great.
Bye.